on the international front, you actually visited Kyiv recently. And I just kind of wanted to get a sense of what you think is going on. Is our intelligence correct that a Russian invasion is likely into Ukraine?
Look, I think, we have the greatest intelligence agency in the world, and we're collaborating very closely with our European allies and with Ukrainians to be sure that we have the best information. But I think what is, publicly been reported, which is the only thing I can really disclose, is that they're in excess of 100,000 troops surrounding Ukraine, Russian troops. And Vladimir Putin has done nothing really to de-escalate this aggression. I think no one knows for sure what his next move will be. What I think has been very important, and one of the reasons we traveled to Kyiv as the Foreign Affairs Committee, was to make it clear that we stand with the Ukrainian people, that no country has a right to change the borders of another country by force, that Ukraine is a democracy, and though not a member of NATO, strongly supported by the United States and allies and the European Union and NATO countries, because we recognize the sovereignty and security of Ukraine reflects on the sovereignty and security of Europe and ultimately the United States. So, we fought 2 world wars to bring peace and stability to the continent of Europe, and we're not going to allow, and we cannot allow, another country to by force take parts of another country. And so we've made it very clear to Vladimir Putin that if he does, in fact, further intrude into Ukraine, there will be crushing, crippling sanctions that will devastate his economy, that will impact the oligarchs that surround him and hopefully him as well. And so far, at least, it has deterred him from taking this military action, although, he has the capability based on where his troops are and the number to do it at any moment.
Congressman, I was going to ask you, and I think you answered in part the question that I wanted to lay out, which is what is the rationale for American interests in Ukraine? Because I quite honestly, I feel like that case has not been made very strongly to the American public. We've heard a lot of noise about Russia being imminently about to invade Ukraine, but not a lot of seeking the consent of the government here in the United States for, pretty dramatic engagement. Obviously, we're sending a whole bunch of weapons to Ukraine. We've got somewhere in the vicinity of, you can correct me if I'm wrong, over 300 military advisors who are in the country. Those are actual American troops who are advising the military in Ukraine. And then you mentioned that, it's an American interest to protect the sovereignty of that country. But I guess that really depends on what are Putin's ambitions beyond a Ukraine ambition. I mean, I think the claim, right, is that Russia believes that they have a territorial claim over Ukraine. If they were to seize that territory, what would that mean for the rest of Europe? Do we really believe that Russia is looking for a staging ground to invade Europe itself, the rest of it?
Well, there's no question. I mean, Vladimir Putin has done that in places all over the continent, most recently in Georgia. So this is not an isolated instance of Russian aggression. And the reality is the decision about whether or not they're going to be a democracy and look to the West or somehow form an alliance with Vladimir Putin is a decision of the Ukrainian people. They've decided to be a democracy. They've decided to turn to the West. They want to be in NATO. That is their right. Vladimir Putin has no right to overrule the sovereign will of the Ukrainian people. And it matters to the United States if we allow, we have to stand for something. We stand for democracy, self-government, the ability of people to make their own decisions about the kind of government they want and the kind of alliances they want to make. That's a central part of international law. If we just sit by and think, okay, Vladimir Putin can take whatever he wants, you're creating danger to the security of Europe and certainly ultimately to the security of the United States. The NATO alliance was a defensive alliance that was built to respond to Russian aggression. It's not an offensive alliance. It's to defend against Russian aggression, which is exactly what we have here. Russia is the aggressor. This claim that there are people in the West that want to be part of Russia is a Russian propaganda. People in the West are Ukrainian. They identify as Ukrainian. They want nothing to do with Russia. And I'll tell you, the one thing that was very clear to me from both my trips to Ukraine, and particularly the one I just returned from, is Ukrainian people are going to fight for their country. They are not going to surrender to the dictatorial thug of Vladimir Putin. And look, they're going to be outgunned and outarmed, but they have tasted freedom and they're going to fight hard. And I think it's important for all the democracies and freedom-loving people of the world to stand with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people and to do all that we can. We're obviously not going to send troops. They're not a NATO country. We don't have a treaty obligation, but we definitely have an interest in repelling Russian aggression that is starting in Ukraine and that can move into, and has in fact presented itself in other parts of Europe, and I dare say has presented itself in meddling in the American presidential election. So we have a strong interest in repelling this kind of aggression.